Hey, good morning, Trianium friends, and welcome to this week's episode of Patio Ponderings. I am on the patio of Trianium Lutheran Church on a cool morning, and you can see the clouds are starting to build back in. We got one day of dry, and I think we're back into the soup here for a few more days. But it's good to be with you all, and I'm glad you have decided to join me. So these past few weeks, in our worship, we are exploring different scriptures that speak to creation. And it's part of our sermon series called Created to Care. And this past Sunday, we heard from Psalm 65. And there's a few verses in here that have really grabbed my attention. And so that's what I've been thinking about, and that's what I want to share with you this morning. So they are excerpts from verses 5 and 8. Says, God of our salvation, you who are the security of all the far edges of the earth, even the distant seas. And then this, those who dwell on the far edges stand in awe of your acts. These verses were particularly poignant as we observed the fairly new federal holiday of Juneteenth this week, which is just yesterday. Juneteenth, while a new holiday in terms of its federal recognition, has been observed in many communities for quite some time. But if you're not familiar with it, it commemorates June 19th, 1865. This was a full 2.5 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, which freed all slaves, went into effect. But it was when federal troops finally got to the edges of the Confederacy, if you will, in Galveston, Texas, and ensured that those slaves in Texas were actually freed finally, several years after this proclamation of good news. Now, unfortunately, that freedom didn't last long in its desired state, and soon Jim Crow laws were enacted across the South, and people there in the South, and actually still throughout the country, remained oppressed, and racism flourished. And a century and a half later, it still flourishes in our country. We still have people that we keep in the far edges of our culture. We still have those who are oppressed based simply on their skin color, and it shows up in many different ways in individual acts of racism and attitudes and biases, and in systemic structures throughout our country. And so I've been thinking about this as it comes together. And where I'm kind of landing is that our focus, our work as followers of Jesus, as God's beloved people, needs to be not on the proclamation of our nation, but on the proclamation of God. That God's love, God's life, God's salvation, God's security, God's acts extend to the far edges of creation. And that means human creation. We are all created in God's image, regardless of our skin color, regardless of our ethnicity or our heritage or our culture. And that is the proclamation that we need to be about. And still we struggle. And so I've been wondering about that and pondering that in how do we finally see all of humanity as made in God's image and love them as such without regard to race. That seems to be an eternal question to ponder. But again, we heard the proclamation of God's love to all edges of the earth this week in church, and we observed a holiday that celebrates that, and so we need to keep working on it. And so now that we've got the lawnmower going in the background, it's time for me to leave the pondering to you. As always, I'd love to hear what you have to say, and we'll see you on Sunday. Bye.